The forge smelled of molten iron and sweat, and the sound of hammering echoed like heartbeats trapped in metal. Cale stood near the anvil, his hands slick with oil and soot, shaping the edge of a broken blade that had once belonged to a warlord. Sparks rained across his leather apron as though he commanded tiny suns. Behind him, the heavy door groaned open, and a cold breeze rolled through the room carrying a scent of something both metallic and sweet. Ozone and ash, like a storm made flesh. He didn't turn. He already knew who it was. She walked in silently, though her armor whispered with every step. Her skin glowed the color of new forged steel tempered by blood, crimson and smooth, muscles coiled under plates etched with sigils of a language older than the Empire. Her white hair was braided into twin cords, each thick as a rope, framing eyes that burned with frost-blue fire. She was called Sithra, commander of the Ninth Host, conqueror of 6 worlds, and the most feared of her kind. Yet Cale only saw the faint tremor in her fingers as she removed her gauntlets, as though the act of unmaking armor required more courage than any battle. "Your weapon," he said softly, gesturing to the sword slung over her back. His voice carried the calm of someone who had long stopped fearing her. The blade was chipped, blackened at the edge, burned by plasma fire that no normal steel could endure. She drew it with a sound like thunder wrapped in silk, laying it gently on the anvil as though it were a wounded animal. "It failed me," she murmured, her accent sharp but steady, words cutting the air like knives. "Or perhaps I failed it." Her gaze met his, and for an instant the forge seemed to shrink. The world condensed into 2 heartbeats and the heat between them. Cale inspected the weapon, his gloved hands tracing the fractures in the alien alloy. "You fought against the coalition again," he said. "It wasn't a question. You always fight." He didn't mention the stories, the whispers that she had burned cities with her hands, that she drank the fury of suns. He'd seen her bleeding in his workshop before, flesh knitting under strange light, and every time she returned a little quieter, a little more human. "You humans name everything as war," she said. "You think peace is just the pause between battles." She looked away, to the wall where his tools hung in neat rows. "Maybe that's why I keep coming here, to remember what silence feels like." He smiled faintly and began to work, heating the blade, hammering the fractures until they glowed. She watched him, her expression unreadable beneath the faint shimmer of heat. It was strange, she thought, that someone so fragile, no armor, no scales, no power, could shape something stronger than himself. She had seen humans die by the thousands, and yet this one stood unflinching beside her shadow. When Cale finally looked up, sweat ran down his temple, and in his eyes was no fear, only focus. "Why do you always bring it to me?" he asked. "Your people have their own forges, their own science." "Because they repair weapons," she said quietly. "You mend what carries them." Her eyes softened, her voice lowering to a confession. "And because when you work, you look at fire the way I wish someone looked at me." The words landed between them like a dropped blade. Cale's hammer stopped mid-swing. For a heartbeat neither moved. The forge crackled, a single ember drifting between them like a lost star. He placed the hammer down slowly. "You're not easy to look away from," he said finally. "But it's not beauty that keeps me here." She tilted her head, almost mocking, yet the question trembled beneath the gesture. "Then what, human?" He wiped his hands, stepped closer, and for the first time dared to stand within her shadow. "Because you're trying so hard to believe you're nothing but what they made you. And every time you stand there, bleeding, angry, alive, you prove them wrong." Her breath caught, a sound like a hiss between iron plates. She wanted to speak, to laugh or strike or flee, but her body betrayed her. The human was too near, his warmth dangerous. He didn't flinch as her hand lifted, red fingers brushing the stubble along his jaw. The gesture was uncertain, as though she were testing whether he was real. "Why do you find me beautiful?" she whispered, the words half a challenge, half a plea. "I'm a monster, human." He only smiled, quiet and steady. "Then maybe monsters are what keep the universe honest." For a long moment she said nothing. Then slowly her forehead touched his. It was not a kiss, not yet. Just a spark pressed between two impossible worlds. Outside, thunder rolled, the war calling her back. She turned away first, her armor whispering as it sealed around her. "I'll return," she said. He didn't ask when. He only watched the door close, the forge's light dimming in her absence. That night, Cale couldn't sleep. He sat by the cooling forge, staring at the blade she had left behind for repair. The alloy pulsed faintly, alive in its own way, and through it he felt echoes, memories not his own. Burning skies, screams in 1,000 tongues. A woman standing alone before a storm. It frightened him, yet he couldn't look away. Humanity had always feared the dark, but he wondered if the dark feared them, too, because they refused to stop reaching for it. When dawn came, the city's alarms rose in the distance, low and mournful. The coalition fleets had broken orbit again, their ships descending like falling stars. Cale's forge quivered as the first shockwaves hit. He grabbed the half-mended sword and turned toward the door, the decision forming before thought could interfere. If she came back wounded, he wouldn't be waiting behind safety. He would meet her on the field with fire and defiance. Outside, smoke coiled over the mountains, and streaks of plasma carved the morning sky. People ran through the streets, carrying what little they could. Cale moved against the flow, toward the eastern ridge where the battle lines would form. He passed soldiers, mechs, and drones, all human, all frightened, all moving anyway. He thought of Sithra's words, of her question. Maybe beauty wasn't softness or symmetry. Maybe it was the refusal to break. As he reached the ridge, the ground shook again. Above, silhouettes pierced the clouds. Crimson-winged ships, alive and terrible. The ninth host had arrived. At their head, a figure descended in a storm of black fire, armor gleaming, eyes alight. Even from afar, Cale recognized her. Sithra landed among her warriors, her voice cutting through the chaos. Orders rippled through the alien ranks, movements too precise to be human. Yet when her gaze swept the battlefield and found him standing there, sword in hand, something inside her faltered. She crossed the ground between them in strides that made the air tremble. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. Her voice wasn't angry. It was scared. "You'll die." He held the reforged blade between them, its edge reflecting both their faces. "So will everyone else if we don't stand together." She stared at him, at the human who dared speak as though equality were a weapon sharper than any steel. "You don't understand," she said. "They won't stop for you. They won't stop for me." "Then we make them stop," Cale said. His heart hammered, but his voice didn't break. Around them, soldiers from both sides clashed, the ground burning. Sithra hesitated, then something broke behind her eyes. A decision centuries overdue. She turned, shouting commands in her language, and the rhythm of the battle shifted. Her warriors began pulling back, forming barriers around civilians instead of crushing them. Confusion spread through the coalition ranks. Cale fought beside her, not because he was strong but because he refused to fall. When her plasma spear shattered and enemies surged forward, he threw himself into the breach, swinging the reforged sword with everything he had. The blade sang, cutting through alien armor like it remembered its purpose. Sithra caught him before he fell, her arm around his waist, fury blazing through her tears. "Fool!" she hissed, pressing her forehead to his. "You can't save me." He smiled through the pain. "Maybe not, but I can remind you why you should want to be saved." She stared at him, trembling. Around them, the tide of war began to break. Not from strength, but from hesitation. Warriors on both sides stopped, uncertain, watching the impossible alliance unfold before their eyes. For the first time in a generation, silence rippled across the field. And in that silence, she kissed him. Brief, fierce, desperate. The kind of kiss that wasn't about love but about remembering it existed. Then she rose, fire crackling along her armor, and screamed a command that shook the heavens. The ninth host turned its weapons away from the humans. The coalition ships above wavered, caught between obedience and awe. The world seemed to hold its breath. When the smoke cleared, Kale was gone from her arms, unconscious but alive. Sithra stood over him, wings unfurled, blood running from a wound across her chest that refused to close. She looked toward the horizon, where the coalition's final wave gathered, and whispered, "If monsters can learn beauty, then humans can learn survival." Her spear reignited, and she rose into the storm to meet them. Behind her, Kale stirred, the reforged blade pulsing faintly beside him. He didn't know if she would return, but he knew what he'd seen. A being born for conquest choosing compassion instead. And maybe, just maybe, that was humanity's truest gift, to make even the stars remember what it meant to care. The forge would wait for her. The fire would never die. When Kale awoke, the world was quiet except for the soft hiss of cooling metal. The battlefield around him lay drowned in ash and mist, the air heavy with the scent of scorched earth and ionized blood. He pushed himself upright, muscles trembling, vision blurred by smoke. The reforged sword lay nearby, its edge still glowing faintly, humming like a living thing. Above the horizon, the dawn bled crimson through the clouds, painting the ruins in a color too close to her skin. He turned, searching for movement, for her silhouette against the wreckage, but saw only broken machines and the twisted remains of banners that once carried purpose. Somewhere in that silence, he felt the absence of Sithra like an echo cut short. He stumbled to his feet, each step crunching over the shards of shattered armor and fused stone. A drone carcass lay half-buried nearby, its optical lens cracked. Through it, a faint light blinked, an emergency feed still active. He crouched, tapping the interface, and a distorted projection flickered to life. Sithra appeared in the hologram, her face streaked with soot, voice calm even as thunder screamed behind her. "If you find this human, then you lived," she said. "The host is scattered. The coalition's core will retaliate. Do not follow me." The image glitched, static chewing at her words. "You once told me monsters keep the universe honest. Then promise me, when they come again, you'll remind them what honesty costs." The recording ended, leaving him staring at nothing, hand trembling above the fading light. Kale exhaled, the taste of iron on his tongue. Promise. He wasn't good at promises. He'd made one once, to survive the invasion that burned his home, and failed half of it by still caring. But this one felt different. Not duty, not love exactly, but something older. The instinct that humanity had always carried into the void, the refusal to surrender meaning even when the stars burned. He gathered what supplies remained from the fallen soldiers, scavenging plasma cells and rations. The reforged sword he strapped across his back, its hum syncing with his heartbeat. Then he began walking toward the ridge where the last smoke trails still rose. Days blurred into a rhythm of movement and silence. The war had thinned the world, stripping it to essentials: breath, hunger, will. Kale found remnants of both armies. Alien helmets cracked like eggshells, human rifles melted into slag, the occasional survivor delirious with shock. He helped where he could, binding wounds, sharing water. Some looked at him like a ghost, others like a fool. Rumors spread among the refugees of a crimson angel who had turned against her kind to shield them. No one could agree if she lived or not. Kale didn't argue. He just kept walking, following the faint trail of glass soil and burnt air she always left behind. On the fifth night, a storm rolled in, electric and fierce. He took shelter beneath the ruins of a shuttlecraft, watching lightning crawl across the sky. The storm carried voices, distorted transmissions bouncing through the upper atmosphere. Sector 12 compromised. Non-human defectors cited. Priority elimination. He recognized her name buried in the code. Sithra. The words were enough to drag him from exhaustion. He sealed his coat, checked the sword's charge, and moved into the rain. Each drop hissed against his skin like molten dust. Somewhere ahead, beyond the wasteland's edge, she was still fighting. The trail led him to the skeletal remains of an orbital tower, once a trade hub linking Earth's colonies to the stars. Now it was a mausoleum, bodies frozen mid-flight, debris suspended by the tower's failing gravcore. Lightning illuminated a shape at its base. Tall, motionless, wings folded like shards of night. Sithra. She knelt beside a fallen comrade of her kind, whispering something in their guttural language before closing their eyes. When she sensed him, she didn't startle. "You ignore orders well," she said without turning. Her voice was tired, brittle as broken glass. "You leave terrible directions," Kale answered, stepping closer. She looked back then, her face streaked with rain and ash, her armor cracked along the seams. The sight hollowed him. "You shouldn't have come," she said. "They're hunting me. They'll kill anyone who stands near." Kale shrugged, the faintest smile ghosting across his lips. "Wouldn't be the first time humanity's been outmatched." Her gaze softened, but only slightly. "You still don't understand. The coalition doesn't forgive betrayal. To them, mercy is corruption." She stood, lightning crawling across her armor's runes. "And now, because of you, I remember what it feels like to want something I was designed to destroy." The confession cracked something between them, more dangerous than any weapon. Kale didn't move. "Then stop being what they designed," he said quietly. "You think we were born ready to survive the universe? We just learned how to break the rules that tried to erase us." She stared at him, eyes narrowing, caught between awe and fury. "You speak as if defiance is a virtue." "It's the only thing that ever kept us alive," he said. "That, and finding beauty in what others call impossible." For a heartbeat, the storm quieted, and the sound of their breathing filled the world. Then, far above, a fleet's shadow crossed the clouds, and the sky ignited. Orbital beams cut through the rain, searing the tower's edges. Sithra cursed in her tongue, grabbing Kale by the shoulder and dragging him beneath the shattered platform. "They've found me." The ground shuddered as plasma strikes tore through the valley. Kale's vision filled with light, his ears ringing. He looked up to see her face inches from his, expression fierce, almost wild. "If we're to die," she said, "let it be for something neither side understands." She rose, wings unfurling, each feather a blade of living energy. "Stay behind me." He shook his head. "Not this time." Before she could argue, he leapt forward, swinging the reforged sword into the nearest descending drone. The blade connected with a roar that split the air, energy rippling outward in a burst of white fire. Sithra's eyes widened as the drone exploded. "What did you?" "You said it was alloyed from your world's metal," he shouted through the chaos. "Guess it still remembers how to sing." They fought together then, human and alien, two sparks defying a storm. Every strike she made was precision. Every move of his reckless, desperate, alive. When her plasma spear overloaded, he caught the next blast on his sword, the energy coursing through his veins like lightning. Pain became rhythm. Survival became dance. But even defiance has a cost. When the final drone fell, smoke rising in its wake, Kale collapsed to one knee. The sword pulsed erratically, drained, and his breath came in ragged gasps. Sithra rushed to him, catching his shoulders. "You're bleeding," she said. "You humans have too much blood." He laughed weakly. "We like to share." She tore fabric from her armor's inner lining, pressing it to his wound. Her fingers shook. "You shouldn't have followed me." "You keep saying that," he murmured. "But here we are." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not empty. The rain slowed, and the storm retreated toward the mountains. Sithra looked upward, to the fleet still circling in the clouds. "They'll send more. They always do." Kale followed her gaze, then looked back at her. "Then let's make sure they remember what they're fighting." "You mean who?" she corrected softly. He smiled. "That too." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded, decision hardening in her eyes. "There's a place," she said, "beyond the ridge of glass. A human resistance camp. If we reach it, we can send a signal, proof that the host has broken ranks." "A truce?" he asked. "A beginning," she said. They traveled together through the wasteland, following the pulse of distant transmitters. Nights were colder now, the stars sharp as wounds against the black. They spoke little, but the silence between them changed. Less like distance, more like understanding. Sometimes, when she thought he slept, Sithra would trace the air above his face, her expression unreadable. And sometimes he'd wake to find her watching the dawn with a look that wasn't war but wonder. Once, she caught him smiling at her and said, "You stare as though you've never seen a storm." "Maybe I haven't," he answered. "Not one that learned to stop destroying." On the 7th day, they reached the ridge of glass. It wasn't a ridge but a scar, sand fused by orbital fire into a translucent plain stretching for miles. Beneath their feet, the world reflected their shapes like ghosts. At its center stood an old relay tower, cracked but standing. Kale approached its base, prying open a maintenance hatch. Circuits hummed faintly inside. "It still works," he said. "We can piggyback a signal through the old channels." Sithra knelt beside him, her fingers weaving patterns through the air, rewriting code with gestures too fluid to be human. "Hurry," she murmured. "They'll trace us." He grinned. "Then let's make sure they find something worth fearing." The tower came alive in a blaze of light, beams shooting skyward. Across the night, every sensor, every satellite, every fleet ship caught the same message. A human and a crimson warrior standing together beneath a fractured sky. No weapons, no surrender, only truth. Kale's voice carried through the transmission. "We're not your enemies. Not anymore. The only monsters left are the ones who can't see what's standing in front of them." The broadcast echoed across systems before the feedback fried the relay. The silence that followed was immense. Sithra turned to him, expression unreadable. "You've doomed us both." "Maybe," he said, wiping soot from his face. "But we told the truth." She laughed softly then, a sound like iron breaking and healing all at once. "You really are the most dangerous species I've ever met. Because we don't die quietly? Because you make others want to live loudly." She stepped closer, her voice low. "Even monsters." The wind caught her hair, silver strands framing her scarred face. And in that fragile stillness Kale realized the universe might never forgive them, but it might finally listen. Above, the fleet lights shifted, formations breaking, hesitation spreading like cracks in glass. Somewhere in that uncertainty lay hope. Sithra looked to the sky, then back at him. "They'll send envoys and hunters. They won't forget this." "Neither will we," Kale said. He reached out, his hand hovering inches from hers. For the first time, she didn't flinch. Their fingers touched, metal and flesh, heat and pulse, and the contact grounded them both. "If beauty exists," she whispered, "it's this, choosing connection when every instinct says to kill." "Then don't stop choosing," he replied. They stood there until dawn bled across the ridge, painting the glass beneath them in crimson light. For a brief, impossible moment, the world felt new again. Not fixed, not safe, but alive, and that was enough. Somewhere deep in the tower, a faint pulse continued, a heartbeat of signal bouncing into the stars. The message was clear, though no one could translate it fully. Humanity endures, and even monsters can change. The transmission's echo lingered across the stars long after the tower's light faded. Somewhere, among fractured constellations and drifting debris, the message found listeners. Some afraid, some furious, and a few curious enough to pause their weapons. On the glass ridge, Kale and Sithra stood beneath the sky that no longer roared, the silence between heartbeats louder than any victory. They didn't know yet what the broadcast had awakened, only that the universe had changed direction by the smallest degree. And sometimes Kale thought that was how revolutions began, not in explosions but in the choice to stand close to something terrifying and call it beautiful. They moved at dawn, shadows stretching long across the plain. The tower still hummed faintly, its circuits burning out one by one like dying stars. Sithra's armor was scorched, one wing torn where plasma had grazed it, but her stride didn't falter. Kale watched her with a mixture of admiration and worry. Each step seemed a defiance of her own limits. "You need rest," he said. "Machines rest when they're broken. she answered. I'm not broken yet. Her voice was calm, but he heard the fracture beneath. He didn't argue. Humans had learned that healing wasn't always about stopping. Sometimes it was just about walking beside someone until they believed they could. By midday, the sky filled again with distant movement. Fleets repositioning in orbit, patterns shifting like schools of metal fish. Sithra glanced upward, eyes narrowing. They're scanning for the source. The coalition will send their sentinels next. And what are those? Kale asked. Not soldiers, she said. Judges. Machines built from thought and bone. They don't fight. They erase. Her expression hardened, and for the first time, fear touched her voice. If they find us, they'll rewrite what we were until even memory denies us. Kale tightened his grip on the sword. Then let's give them something worth remembering. It wasn't bravado, it was human stubbornness, the quiet kind that built empires and graves alike. They reached the edge of the ridge by dusk, where the land dipped into a valley veined with light. Below lay the remnants of an old city, half buried in glass and dust. The buildings leaned like bones under a transparent sea, and in the center, faint power signatures still flickered. Sithra scanned the horizon. Human settlement pre-war. Your people abandoned it when the first orbital strikes fell. Then it's ours again, Kale said. They descended cautiously, the glass crunching underfoot. Every surface reflected fragments of sky and fire, and in their distorted faces, Kale saw how war remade even beauty into mirrors of loss. Inside the city's ruins, they found shelter in a cathedral whose walls were etched with names. The dead or the forgotten. He couldn't tell. That night, Sithra sat beside the remnants of a broken altar, staring at her reflection in the cracked marble. Do you believe in gods, human? She asked without looking at him. Kale considered the question. I believe we keep inventing them to explain what we can't forgive ourselves for. And if one stood before you, I'd ask what they were afraid of. She turned then, meeting his gaze. You really think everything fears something? Everything alive does, he said. Even you. Her laugh was soft, but it trembled. Then maybe I've been alive longer than I knew. In the quiet, Kale studied her, not as the warrior who had burned cities, but as someone learning to exist between roles. The way her hands flexed unconsciously when she wasn't holding a weapon. The way her eyes searched the shadows, not for threats, but for understanding. There was humanity in her, he realized, not because she looked or acted human, but because she carried guilt. Only a species capable of empathy could hate itself this beautifully. Sithra, he said finally, what will you do if they accept the message? She looked down at her armor, where cracks glowed faintly like veins of magma. Then I'll have to decide what I am when I'm not their weapon. Before he could answer, the ground vibrated. Dust fell from the cathedral's ceiling, and a low hum filled the air, deep, rhythmic, mechanical. Sithra's head snapped upward. They've found us. Outside, light bled through the stained glass, first white, then blue, then an impossible spectrum that burned the eyes. Kale felt the vibration in his bones, as though reality itself were holding its breath. They ran outside, and the sight froze him. Hovering above the valley was a colossal figure, its form shifting between metal and mist. No wings, no armor. Just an endless lattice of light folding in on itself. The Sentinel. Its voice rolled across the city like thunder wrapped in reason. Defector Sithra 9. Surrender for dissolution. Human anomaly will be extracted and catalogued. Sithra stepped forward, eyes blazing. You'll have to unmake me first. The Sentinel's light pulsed. Compliance is inevitable. Kale moved beside her, raising the sword. The machine tilted its head, curious. Organic interference detected. Species designation, human. Statistical probability of survival, 0. That's the problem with your math, Kale said through clenched teeth. It doesn't account for faith. The Sentinel hesitated. Faith, the act of believing in something that terrifies you, Sithra answered, her wings flaring. You wouldn't understand. The air exploded as the Sentinel fired, energy cascading like liquid lightning. Kale braced behind her, the sword singing as it absorbed the first impact. The force threw them both backward, glass shattering in a storm around them. Sithra caught herself mid-air, one wing collapsing under the strain. "You can't fight it head-on," Kale shouted. "Then we don't," she growled. "We change the rules." She darted upward, weaving through the Sentinel's energy arcs. Kale watched her move, a streak of red fire against a storm of light. She wasn't just fighting. She was rewriting physics through will. Yet every blow she struck cost her, sparks trailing from her armor like bleeding stars. He searched the wreckage for anything that could help and spotted the old city's fusion core flickering beneath the cathedral. He ran toward it, dodging falling debris. The control panel was ancient but functional enough to recognize. If he overloaded the containment field, it could trigger an electromagnetic surge strong enough to disrupt the Sentinel's lattice for a few seconds, long enough for Sithra to strike. "Kale!" Her voice thundered from above, strained. "What are you doing?" "Buying you time," he shouted back. "Don't you dare." Too late. He tore open the panel, hands flying over cracked keys. The hum deepened as the core began to glow. Sithra dove, grabbing him by the shoulder, her grip bruising. "You'll die. So will you if I don't." Their eyes locked, hers burning with fury, his with quiet resolve. "Trust me," he said. She hesitated, then nodded once. "When the surge hits, aim for its spine." "Got it." She rose again, higher than before, wings blazing. Kale slammed the final override. The world went white. The shockwave ripped through the valley, the Sentinel's light fracturing like glass under pressure. Sithra screamed, diving straight through the distortion, her spear a comet. She struck the creature's core, driving it backward in a burst of soundless fire. The Sentinel convulsed, its voice fracturing into static. Contradiction, persistence, anomaly? Then it imploded, collapsing into a sphere of light that vanished with a whisper. Silence fell. Kale staggered, vision swimming. The cathedral was gone, the ridge a crater of molten glass. Sithra landed beside him, smoke curling from her armor, eyes wide in disbelief. "You insane, beautiful fool," she breathed. He smiled weakly. "Wasn't beauty your thing?" "Not when it kills you." She knelt, pressing a hand against his chest. His pulse was weak but steady. "You absorbed too much radiation." "Guess that makes me radiant," he muttered. She actually laughed, a sharp, startled sound that broke the night. "Don't die with jokes in your mouth. Wouldn't be human otherwise." She carried him into the ruins, laying him on a patch of unbroken floor. The stars above shimmered like witnesses. Around them, the city's remaining lights flickered and faded, one by one, until only their breathing filled the space. "It will come again," she whispered. "The coalition doesn't stop." Kale's eyes fluttered open. "Then we start before they do." "With what?" "With this," he said, weakly pointing to the horizon. "Proof that monsters and men can stand on the same ground without it breaking." She followed his gaze. Dawn was rising again, slow and inevitable, and for the first time she didn't look away. Sithra reached out, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "When this is over," she said, "they'll call me traitor. They'll call you beautiful," he whispered. "And they'll be right." Her breath caught, trembling. "You don't even know what beauty means to my kind." "Then teach me," he said. She leaned closer until her words were almost a sigh. "It means endurance. To hold form even when everything tries to unmake you." "Sounds human to me." She smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why I can't stop listening to you." The night faded, the ruins glowing with reflected light. Above them, fragments of the destroyed Sentinel drifted like glitter through the atmosphere, burning into trails that would be mistaken for new constellations. To anyone watching from afar, it might have looked like a miracle. To them, it was just survival, and that was enough. When Kale woke again, the air was cool and still. The ruins had settled into silence. The glow of dawn now softened into gold. His body ached with a dull, rhythmic pulse, each breath a reminder that he was still, impossibly, alive. Beside him, Sithra sat motionless, her armor dimmed, wings folded close. For a long moment he simply watched her. How alien and yet fragile she looked in the morning light, as though she were carved from the sky itself. When she noticed his eyes open, her relief came in the smallest of gestures. A breath released she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "You humans refuse extinction even in sleep," she murmured. "It's not defiance," he said. "It's habit." She stood, scanning the horizon. The distant fleets had not returned, but faint trails of ion light cut across the sky, proof that something was still hunting them. "The sentinels are never alone," she said. "For each one destroyed, two awaken. They share memory." Kale sat up, his pulse quickening. "So it knows how we beat it?" "Worse," she replied, turning toward him. "It knows why." Her gaze was heavy, filled with something that wasn't quite fear but something deeper. Remorse. "They will see compassion as contagion now. They will purge it from their code, from their kind. And I am the vector." Kale smiled faintly despite himself. "Then maybe we've already won. If they have to fear what we feel." Her lips twitched, the closest thing to a smile he'd ever seen her attempt. But it vanished quickly. "Don't mistake reaction for victory," she said. "They'll burn your world before they let that emotion spread." "Then we stop them," he said simply. She looked at him as though measuring the weight of that promise, then nodded once. "There is a place old even before your kind reached the stars. The Vault of Horus. It holds the seed protocol, the origin of their network. If we reach it, I can rewrite the core directive. Replace obedience with empathy." "You can do that?" "I can try," she said quietly. "But it will destroy me." Kale rose, brushing dust from his clothes. "Then I'm going with you." She shook her head. "You don't understand. Once the process begins, the vault will collapse. Everything within will be erased. Even memory. All the more reason not to let you go alone," he said. "Someone has to remember you." Her expression hardened, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "You're impossible. That's what you said the first time you met me. And it hasn't stopped being true." He grinned. "Good. Let's keep it that way." Their journey to the vault took them across wastelands that once housed oceans. The ground shimmered with the ghosts of tides, salt crusted over cracked stone. The sun burned pale and cold, light diffused through the ash-filled air. Sithra moved ahead, her pace tireless, though Kale saw the strain in her posture, the small falters she tried to hide. He said nothing, choosing instead to match her steps, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone. At night, they camped beneath the ruins of satellites fallen like dead stars. Around their small fire, the world felt vast and empty, yet never hopeless. One night, as wind howled across the plain, Sithra asked quietly, "Do you ever wish you'd stayed behind? Lived a normal life?" Kale stared into the flames. "I did once, but I think humans were never built for normal. We look at normal and call it the start of something bigger. And when it ends, then we build something new." She studied him for a long time, the firelight painting reflections in her eyes. "Your species turns pain into art. And yours turns art into war," he said softly. "Maybe that's why we found each other." Her smile was small but real this time, to see if they can coexist. By the 6th day, the landscape shifted. Mountains of obsidian rose from the dust, sharp and smooth as blades. At their center lay the vault, a colossal structure half buried in stone, glowing faintly from seams of violet energy. The air around it hummed, thick with static and memory. Sithra stopped at the ridge, wings flaring slightly. "This is where they were born," she whispered. "Every directive, every command, they began here." Kale gazed at the monolith. "Then it's time to rewrite history." "Not history," she said. "Instinct." Her expression softened as she looked at him. "If I fail, you won't." "If I do," she pressed, "promise me something. Anything. Don't let them make you hate what you tried to save." He didn't know how to answer that, so he took her hand instead. Her fingers were cool, metal and warmth woven together. For the first time, she didn't pull away. Together they descended into the vault. The entrance was vast and silent, carved in the shape of something that might once have been wings. Inside, corridors stretched endlessly, walls alive with flowing light. As they moved deeper, the hum of machinery grew into a pulse that seemed to sync with their hearts. At the core stood a chamber of glass and fluid. Within it a sphere suspended by tendrils of light. The seed pulsed like a heartbeat, slow and immense. Sithra approached it, every step heavy with purpose. "Once I begin, it cannot be undone," she said. "The vault will seal itself, and the signal will spread through their network in minutes." Kale nodded. "And when it does, every mind tied to the coalition will feel what I feel. Fear, pain, empathy. They will awaken, or they will collapse. Then let's make sure they wake up," he said. She turned toward him, eyes bright. "You shouldn't have followed me here. You've said that before. And you've never listened." He smiled. "Maybe that's why it works." She reached for the seed. The chamber shuddered as her hand touched the light, her body arching as energy poured through her. The walls blazed with symbols, ancient code rewriting itself in violent motion. Kale shielded his eyes, calling her name, but her voice was lost in the roar. Then, through the storm of light, she spoke. Not with her mouth, but through the very air. "Kale, it's too much. Hold on," he shouted. "You can do this. I can't contain it. Then share it." The words burst from him before thought. "You said empathy. Let it be both of us." For an instant, the light surged toward him, tendrils of energy wrapping around his chest, linking them. Pain exploded through him, memories not his own flooding his mind. Worlds burning, soldiers dying in her arms, centuries of orders obeyed without choice. He saw her loneliness, her rage, her desperate wish to be more than a weapon. And beneath it he felt her awe at humanity, at him. The link deepened, and for a heartbeat they were one being, human and alien, fire and breath. The vault's hum became a single perfect note, resonating through creation. Then everything went silent. The light dimmed. The seed hung motionless, its glow now soft, gentle. Sithra collapsed, the link severed. Kale caught her, lowering her to the floor. Her eyes flickered open, faint light still swirling in their depths. "Did it work?" he whispered. She smiled weakly. "Listen." He did, and heard it. Distant voices echoing through the chamber. Confused, afraid, alive. The network had awakened. Across the stars, machines hesitated. Soldiers dropped their weapons. Fleets stopped firing. The directive had changed. Empathy had entered their code. But the vault was breaking apart. Cracks ran up the walls, molten energy leaking through. "We have to go," Kale shouted, lifting her. She shook her head. "You go. The vault needs a host to stabilize the release." "No, Kale. I'm not leaving you." Her hand found his cheek, fingers trembling. "You already saved me. Don't lose that by dying here." He held her gaze, tears cutting through the grime on his face. "You said beauty was endurance. So endure." She laughed softly, even as the chamber burned. "You never stopped turning my words against me. Then you taught me well." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. "If I survive this, I'll find you. If you don't," he whispered, "I'll remember you in every fire." Her eyes softened. "You humans, always turning death into poetry. It's how we survive." "Then live," she said. And before he could argue, she pushed him backward, using the last of her strength to hurl him toward the corridor. The door sealed, locking him out. Through the glass he saw her turn back to the seed, wings unfurling, her body dissolving into light. The vault trembled, light expanding outward in a wave that rolled across worlds. Then, with a sound like a sigh, it vanished. Kale fell to his knees outside, the ground shaking beneath him. The mountains split, releasing torrents of molten glass that streamed into the sky, glowing like auroras. When it ended, there was only silence and an empty crater where the vault had been. He screamed her name until his voice broke, but there was no answer. Only the wind, carrying a faint shimmer of heat that brushed his cheek like a goodbye. And in that warmth, he felt her presence. Not gone, but diffused, scattered through every pulse of the universe that had just learned how to feel. He sat there for a long time, staring at the horizon as the stars blinked awake. Above, the coalition fleets drifted in new patterns, hesitant and confused. No orders came. No fire fell. The war, for the first time, paused. Cale exhaled slowly, closing his eyes. "You did it," he whispered. "You changed everything." The world exhaled as if waking from a long fever. The vault's crater cooled slowly, its molten glow fading into amber glass that stretched for miles. Cale sat at its edge, the wind combing through his hair, carrying the faint scent of ozone and ash. The silence felt alive, pregnant with the weight of what had changed. He had seen battles end before, but never like this. There was no cheering, no triumph, only the vast, trembling quiet of a universe that had been forced to feel for the first time. Above him, the night sky shimmered where the coalition fleets once loomed. Now they hung motionless, lights flickering uncertainly, as though they were waiting for permission to breathe. Cale rose, legs unsteady. His clothes were torn, blood crusted along his side, but his heartbeat was steady, anchored by purpose. He turned his gaze upward and whispered her name. The air seemed to pulse in answer, soft, invisible, but there. He smiled faintly, knowing she had become part of it, spread through the very fabric of the network. Every hum of a ship, every spark of plasma, every flicker of artificial life now carried a trace of Sithra's defiance, her empathy. "You made them feel," he said quietly. "You made them see." The words drifted into the air, merging with the wind as though carried to someone listening far beyond sight. When he began walking again, he found others, refugees, soldiers, engineers, emerging from bunkers and shattered ships. They looked dazed, haunted, and yet lighter. No one was fighting. The coalition forces that remained on the surface had lowered their weapons, confusion softening their mechanical eyes. Cale moved among them, helping where he could. Some recognized him, the man from the transmission, the human who stood beside the Crimson Warrior. Others didn't need to know his name. They only saw that he wasn't afraid. In their silence, an understanding grew. Something fundamental had shifted, and none of them could go back. Days became weeks as the world reshaped itself. The coalition ships withdrew to orbit, sending envoys instead of drones. The first meeting took place in the ruins of the capital city, Neutral Ground. Cale was invited not as a soldier, but as a witness. He sat across from the envoys, beings of light and code now carrying the weight of emotion like fragile glass. Their voices trembled with something new, humility. "The defector signal has rewritten us," one said. "We cannot unfeel." "Then don't," Cale replied. "Learn from it." They regarded him with awe and unease. "You speak as if pain is a teacher." "It is," he said softly. "The best kind." After that meeting, they began to rebuild, not as victors and vanquished, but as survivors learning a shared language. Empathy didn't come easily to them. Some of the coalition still resisted, unable to reconcile what they had become. But Sithra's influence lingered in their algorithms, whispering through their code like a song that couldn't be silenced. Cale traveled among the colonies, teaching cooperation where distrust had festered. He spoke of her, never by title or rank, only by name, as though that alone was enough to change the air in a room. "She was built for conquest," he would say, "and chose compassion instead." And every time he said it, he saw something flicker in his listener's eyes. Possibility. At night, he still dreamed of her. Sometimes she was standing in the forge, watching the fire with that same distant wonder. Sometimes she was flying through storms, laughter breaking through thunder. And sometimes, when he woke, he swore he heard her voice, a whisper woven into the hum of the world around him. Endure. He always smiled when that happened, no matter how tired he felt. Humanity, he thought, had never truly known how to give up. They survived not by strength, but by the belief that love and loss were two halves of the same pulse. And somewhere, out among the stars, she was still beating within that rhythm. Months passed before Kale returned to the forge. It had survived the war in pieces. Walls cracked, roof collapsed. But the anvil still stood, the same one she had placed her weapon upon the first time she'd entered. He rebuilt it slowly, not because he needed to, but because creation itself had become sacred. The act of shaping metal felt like prayer. Each strike of the hammer echoed in his chest, a conversation with memory. Sometimes, when sparks flew, he caught glimpses of her face in the light, sharp, fierce, almost smiling. "You never really left, did you?" he whispered one evening. The forge crackled, the flames dancing higher, as if in answer. The coalition sent representatives to help with reconstruction. Among them was a being named Eos, one of the reprogrammed sentinels. It was strange and elegant, its form shifting between human and machine. "Your influence spreads faster than expected," it told Kale, voice resonating like two tones in harmony. "They look to you as the translator of empathy." "I'm just a blacksmith," Kale said. "You're the spark," Eos replied. "The defector's imprint lives within our systems, but your humanity gives it shape." "She gave it shape," he corrected. "I only showed her where to stand." The sentinel tilted its head. "You grieve her. Every day. And yet you build." "That's how we grieve," Kale said. "We build what we lost until it becomes real again." Over time, the world began to heal. Cities rose from ruins, not in the image of dominance but coexistence. Coalition architects worked alongside human engineers, their designs blending technology with organic flow. The first joint colony, named Sithra's Reach, was founded on the glass plain where the vault once stood. Its streets glowed with embedded light patterns that pulsed gently, a rhythm that matched the human heartbeat. Children, human and synthetic alike, played among the crystalline spires. And at the city's heart stood a statue, not of victory, but of connection. A human and an alien reaching toward each other, hands almost touching, the space between them alive with flame. Kale never claimed ownership of the vision. When people asked what drove him, he always gave the same answer, a question. "What question?" they would ask. He'd smile. "Why do you find me beautiful?" The phrase spread, quoted in schools, sung in songs, painted on banners. Some took it as a symbol of unity, others as a mystery to ponder. But for Kale, it was a memory, the moment a monster questioned her own reflection and a human answered without flinching. Years slipped by, marked not by war but by the quiet milestones of rebuilding. Kale grew older, his hair streaked with gray, his hands still steady. The forge became a place of pilgrimage. Pilots, diplomats, and poets came seeking the man who once fought beside a myth. He never turned them away, but he never let them call him hero. "If you want to honor her," he'd say, "forgive yourselves for being afraid." He would then return to his work, shaping blades not for battle but for ceremony, their edges dull, their forms symbolic, a reminder that weapons could be reborn as art. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the horizon, Kale sat outside the forge watching the city lights shimmer against the glass plane. The air was warm, filled with distant laughter. He closed his eyes, letting the hum of the rebuilt world wash over him. Then he felt it, a faint vibration in the sword that hung at his side. It was the same blade he had reforged for her years ago, now worn smooth by time. The metal pulsed once, twice, then settled into a steady rhythm. His breath caught. "Sithra," he whispered. A voice, not sound, but sensation, answered within him. "Still watching the fire, human?" His heart stopped, then surged. "You're alive. Alive enough." He laughed softly, tears slipping free. "I knew you'd find a way. You made sure I would. You carried part of me out of the vault when we linked. I've been in your machines, your signals, your cities. In you." He looked out at the horizon, eyes wet. "Then you've seen what we've built." "I have. And it's beautiful." "Even for monsters?" he asked, smiling through the ache. especially for monsters. The connection pulsed warmly, like a heartbeat against his palm. Will I ever see you again? He asked. You already do, she replied. Every act of mercy, every stubborn kindness. That's where I live now. He nodded slowly. Then I'll keep the fire burning. I know, she whispered, the warmth fading like a sunset. You always do. The silence that followed was full, not empty. Kale leaned back, closing his eyes, feeling the night settle around him like an embrace. The sword hummed once more, then quieted, as if finally at peace. Years later, when Kale's forge fell silent for the last time, they found him seated beside the anvil, hands folded over the reforged blade. He was smiling. The city mourned him, but not with sorrow, with gratitude. They lit fires across the plains, thousands of them, until the night looked like a sea of stars reflected on glass. And among those flames, some swore they saw a figure of crimson light standing beside him, watching, whispering something the wind carried away before anyone could understand. Generations passed, and the legend became story, then history, then myth. Yet on quiet nights, when the wind swept across Sithra's reach, the glass plane would sing, a faint hum that resonated like a heartbeat, like a forge still glowing. The children who grew up there said it was the song of the defector and the human, the melody that taught the universe to feel. And somewhere beyond the edge of known stars, a voice whispered softly into the dark. Why do you find me beautiful? I'm a monster, human. And every time, the universe answered, because you remind us what it means to care.